Hello and welcome. With Windows 11 getting worse by the day and Windows 10 being killed off entirely, more people than ever are choosing to switch to Linux, so I thought I'd remaster my previous video with a guide on how exactly to go about doing that. The last video had 25 different distros, but this one has 32. And first, how do you even make some installation media in the first place? So, to make your installation media, you'll either want a high-capacity USB or an SSD hooked up to an adapter like I have. Then, you'll want to download and open a tool called Ventoy. Select the disk that you want to use, and if there are files already on the disk that you don't want to get rid of, you can do a non-destructive install, but otherwise you can just hit the install button. And it's done. Now you can just put all the disk image files in here, and when you boot from the drive, it will give you a menu of which one you want to boot from. So, 3 quick warnings before we start doing everything else. Firstly, this video is for modern 64-bit UEFI systems, so basically, if it's a desktop or a laptop, has an Intel like i3, Celeron, or AMD like Ryzen processor, is less than 12 years old, and came with Windows 8 or later, then it will probably be fine. And the next 2 warnings are if you're planning to install Linux and Windows on the same machine. Firstly, for Windows, make sure that BitLocker is turned off unless you know the recovery key. It might be called device encryption depending on your edition of Windows, but especially for your C drive, just make sure BitLocker is off. And secondly, it's generally a bad idea to install Linux and Windows to the same disk unless you really know what you're doing, because it can create problems for both OSs. And for this video, the machine I'll be using to demonstrate this is the ThinkPad T490S from about 6 years ago, but still works fine. It runs basically the same as a modern system. Here are the specs if you're interested. And now, let's get on with actually setting everything up. Now this is the order I'll be doing the distros in. You can probably see them just from the chapters on this video, but I have categorized them into 4 levels of difficulty, and I've also highlighted some recommended ones for example, gamers or just beginners. And yeah, let's get on with preparing to boot into the install medium. So, the first thing you'll want to do is, when you turn on your machine, immediately start spamming the BIOS key. I'll put a list of them for different manufacturers on screen. In my case, it's F1, but it does differ between what make your motherboard or machine is. And then you'll want to go into the security section. There might also be a dedicated secure boot section, depending on your machine. If secure boot definitely isn't anywhere, it doesn't have secure boot, then you don't need to worry about this. But if it does, go into secure boot and make sure it's set to disabled. Now, some machines do have an option to set it to audit mode, but that clears every key on the TPM, so if it does cause problems, then it's just very unlikely that resetting it will fix them, so it's a lot better to set it to disabled rather than audit mode. And then, in your either general or boot section, make sure that USB booting is enabled if it can be enabled or disabled. And then, once you're happy with all your configuration changes, save and exit, and then this time you'll want to spam the boot menu key. For most machines it's F12, but again, I'll put a list on screen. And you'll see, if you've done everything correctly, your USB device should show up in the boot menu, and if you select it, then it boots in to your Ventoy device. For example, Arch, just select any one of these files, and then you can either boot in normal mode or grub2 mode. For some reason with Ventoy, some of the distros behave weirdly if you boot them in normal mode instead of grub2, so I will put a warning before those ones where you would need to boot them in grub2 mode. Anyway, let's get on with the separate distro guides. So, this is the CachyOS guide. It will provide you with a menu when you boot into it, but most people will just want to go with the first option of CachyOS. And then it gives us a little welcome to CachyOS screen. You can read the documentation if you really want to, but what you'll probably want to do is launch the installer. But first, CachyOS does require an internet connection. So, if you just connect to your Wi-Fi network, and if you have an Ethernet cable, look at you, because everything gets auto-configured. And I should mention that nearly all of the distros here will start with the US keyboard layout by default. So if your Wi-Fi password has special characters in it, which are in different places based on the keyboard layout, then you might want to go into the settings in the live mode and change what layout you're using. But anyway, we can go on to launch the installer now that we have an internet connection. And because not every image I'm using in this video is brand new, then it will give us a warning because this is a few months old, but it will still be about the same. And then you can choose your bootloader or edition. Now, for some reason, from my experience with CachyOS, even though I've installed all of these bootloaders on other distros with no problem, the CachyOS installer just doesn't seem to like anything other than the default option, so I'd recommend choosing that. And then, welcome to the CachyOS installer. While it's loading its modules, then you can go ahead and select your language. And then you can go ahead and hit next. Then select your time zone. Obviously it's not gonna pick your exact location, but rather the nearest city to you, which in my case would be London. Normally it's just the capital city of whatever country you're in, but then once you've chosen your locale, you can hit next. Then you can choose your keyboard layout if you have a different one to your locale. And then you can choose whether to configure the disk yourself or erase the entire disk, and make sure that you have selected the correct disk to install onto, because you wouldn't want to overwrite your Ventoy disk. But anyway, there's also an option to encrypt the system if you want to, but then once you think you've got everything right, you can hit next. Now it's time to choose a desktop environment. Now, CachyOS helpfully provides sample images of each of these. Now, if you want a customizable Windows experience, I'd go with Plasma Desktop, which is the default environment for CachyOS. If you want a more lightweight Windows desktop, I'd go with LXQT. And if you want a Mac-like experience, I'd go with GNOME or GNOME. But any of these other options are also good as well. Although, the thumbnails just aren't there for some of them. But I will warn you, anything with WM or Window Manager in the name tends to be a tad bit more complicated. So if you're not sure what you're doing, just pick one of the ones I mentioned. I'm gonna go with Plasma Desktop just because it's the default one. And then you can choose whether to include some extra packages if you want to. And then you can put the full name for your user and your username. Most installers just autofill this based on what you put for the full name. You can name your device if you want, and then you can choose a password. Now you can also choose to log in automatically without your password if you really want to, and if you want to, you can set a separate password for the administrator or root account. And then it will give you a summary of what it's going to do, and then once you're sure you're happy with everything, you can just hit install and wait for it to do its thing. And then once it's done, you can choose whether to keep using the live environment or restart immediately, and then you can just hit done. And it gives you a welcome screen. Now again, all the stuff from before is up here, like documentation and support, and there are two new options where you can view some apps and tweaks, and that is CachyOS. This is the install guide for EndeavourOS, and there's a normal boot option or an NVIDIA driver mode. And then with EndeavourOS, you can do an offline install if you want, but that has a lot less options than an online install, so I'd connect to Wi-Fi now if you want to. And most distros start with the US keyboard layout by default, so just watch out for that if your Wi-Fi password has special characters in it. And now, once you're connected to Wi-Fi, you can exit this, and then it will give you another menu where you can start the installer, and then you can choose between online and offline mode even if you are connected to the internet, but I would recommend online mode unless you have particularly bad internet. And then, while it's loading modules, you can go ahead and select your locale, and then you can hit next. Then you can select your region. Now, obviously it's not going to display like your exact town or anything. It will normally just do the capital city of the country you're in. So for example, for me it says London, and once you're happy with that, you can hit next. You can change your keyboard layout if it's not the same as your locale, and then hit next again. Then you can choose your desktop environment. If you want, well, what the live environment looks like, a smooth Windows-like experience, I would go with KDE Plasma. If you want a more Mac-like experience, I'd go with GNOME or GNOME. If you want a more lightweight Windows experience, I'd go with LXQT, but there's also a bunch of other ones you can choose from. Now I'm going to go with KDE Plasma because that's the default. And then you can choose whether to install any extra components if you want. And now you can choose your bootloader. If you want a more customizable bootloader, I'd go with Grub, but because you only see the bootloader for about 5 seconds when you start up your PC, I would just leave it with the default. And then, if there's already an OS on this disk, you can choose whether to install alongside it to replace a partition, or completely erase the disk. And that's what I'm going to do. You can choose whether to enable hibernation, configure your swap. I am going to enable hibernation, and also your file system. BetterFS is slightly better for performance, but ext4 is good enough for most people. And make sure you've got the right disk, because you don't want to accidentally erase your Ventoy drive. And you can also choose to encrypt the system if you want to, and then you can enter the full name for your user, and you can change your username if you want, but it will fill this in by default based on what you put in here. You can change the name of your device if you wish, and then you can put in the password for your account. You can choose whether to log in automatically without your password, and if you want to, you can set a different password for the administrator account. And then it gives you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with everything, then you can hit install, and now you just let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either continue to use the live environment, or you can just choose to restart immediately. It gives you a few post-install tasks that you can do, such as update your mirror lists, or update your packages, and maybe even change the wallpaper or your display manager. But yeah, that is EndeavourOS. This is the guide for Fedora Workstation. Now, this is one of the ones that you have to boot in Grub 2 mode from Ventoy, otherwise it causes some boot entry weirdness. But other than that, it should be fine. And it checks the boot media. It should take about 10 seconds, give or take. I just realised you guys couldn't see the previous window because it hadn't mirrored the screens, but that's fine. It was just install or don't, and I selected install. So first, you can select your language and your keyboard layout. And then you can hit next. And if there's another OS on the disk, you can either share the disk with the other OS, or use the entire disk, which is what I'm going to do. And make sure to choose the correct disk, otherwise you might end up overwriting your Ventoy drive. And then you can choose whether to encrypt the disk. And that's about it. It just gives you a summary of what it's going to do, and you have to check, I understand that all existing data will be erased, and then you can hit erase data and install, and let it do its thing. And then, once it's done, you can exit the installer, and then to continue to your system, you can just go ahead and reboot. And then you get a little welcome screen where you can select your language and locale. Then you can select your keyboard layout, and you can connect to Wi-Fi if you want, but I'm not going to. Then you can choose whether to agree to location services or automatic problem reporting. Then instead of clicking on a map like most installers, you can just search for a nearby city, and if you're not sure, just type the capital city of your state or country. So for me that would be London. And then you can choose whether or not to enable third-party repositories. And then enter the full name for your user. And you can change your username if you want, but that's auto-generated based on what your user's full name is. And you can change your profile picture if you want. Then you can set up your password. And then, all done, it's ready to be used. And then, once again, you guys can't see it because it's on the other screen, but it asks if you want to take the tour or not, so I am going to. So, you can get an overview by pressing the Windows key, or just clicking up here. And then you can just start typing in the overview to search for things. And you can stay organized with workspaces. So you can see there are 2 here that you can switch between. For example, I can move the guide to the other workspace. Then, because this uses the GNOME or GNOME desktop environment, which is a lot more Mac-like and laptop-orientated. So for example, you can swipe up with 3 fingers on the touchpad to open the overview. And to move between workspaces, you can swipe left and right with 3 fingers. And then that's the tour, and that is Fedora Linux. For Kubuntu, Kubuntu, however you want to pronounce it, there is an option to install for someone else by doing OEM install, where it installs the basic system, but the person you're installing it for can set up their user account and everything. But this guide assumes that you're installing it for yourself, so we're just going to go with the first option. And then, you guys can't see because it's on the laptop screen, but basically there are 2 buttons, try or install Kubuntu, and you can also change your locale if you want, so I'm going to do that. So instead I am going to try Kubuntu, because that way I can sync the 2 screens. But you would probably just want to go into the installer straight away. And then it might give you a warning about not being connected to the internet, but you don't need to. And then you can select your region, which, no, not Amsterdam, which will normally just be the capital city of your state or country. And then you can change your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. And you can choose whether to do a normal or minimal installation. I'm going to go with minimal just to save time. And then you can choose which disk to install on. Now with Kubuntu, it doesn't let me erase the Ventoy disk, which is very helpful of it. So you can either install alongside an OS that's already on there, replace a partition, or use the entire disk, which I'm going to do. Now you can configure your swap, which is either not or yes, and you can choose your file system. Now BetterFS is best for performance, but ext4 is fine for most people, and you could also go with XFS if you want to. And then you can enter the full name for your user, and you can change your username or the name of your device if you want. Then you can choose your password, and if you want you can auto log in without the password. Then it will give you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with everything you can go ahead and hit install. And now you can just let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either exit to the live system or just restart immediately, which is what I'm going to do. And that is Kubuntu. You can take a look around if you want, although not much is happening because I chose the minimal option, but you normally get a guide if you chose the full installation. So yeah, that's it. Okay, this is the guide for Linux Mint, and you can start it in compatibility mode if you have a really old machine, but if not, you can just start it normally. And now, once you're in Linux Mint, you can just go ahead and click the install icon up here. Then you can select your language and hit continue. And then you can choose your keyboard layout. And then if you want to, you can connect to Wi-Fi, but I'm not going to. Then you can choose whether to install multimedia codecs, which I would recommend doing, but I'm not going to. Then, if you're using Ventoy like I am, it might detect that there are disks that have mounted partitions, but since we're booting off of these disks, then I'm going to select no. And then you can choose whether to install alongside whatever OS is already on there, or you can erase disk and install, or you could just configure the partitions yourself, but I'm going to erase and install. Then you can choose what disk you want to install it on, and make sure not to accidentally select your Ventoy disk. And then you can just hit install now, and then it will give you a confirmation pop-up, and I'm just going to hit continue. Then you can either click where you are on the map or just select the city nearest to you, and then you can put the full name for your user, and you can change the name of your device or your username if you want to. Then you can put in your password and choose whether to log in automatically or require your password. And then you can just hit continue. And it's gonna start installing, so you can just let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either continue testing in the live environment or restart now, which is what I'm gonna do. So it gives you a guide when you first start it up, so let's look through it. So if you want, you can change your desktop colors. So for example, you can either change the style of how it looks, so like this, but I'm just going to leave it as mint Y. You can set it to dark mode if you want, and I don't know, let's set the colour to purple. So you can see all of the little things like the colours under the icons and the colour around the close button is now changed to purple. Then you can set up system snapshots, manage any drivers for stuff like graphics cards, manage multimedia codecs, updates, settings, install some software or configure your firewall, read the documentation if you want, go to these if you have any problems, or maybe even contribute yourself. But yeah, that is Linux Mint. Okay, this is Lubuntu, another one I'm not really sure how to pronounce. And the boot menu is basically the same as Kubuntu or Kubuntu, where you can do an OEM install, start it in safe graphics, or just start it normally, which I am going to choose. And then, like Kubuntu, you can't see because it's on the laptop screen, but you can change your locale, and there are two buttons for try or install Lubuntu. You're probably going to want to pick install, but I'm going to do try so that you guys can actually see what's happening. And it might give you a warning about not being connected to the internet, but you don't need to be. Then you can either click on the map or just put in here where your region is, and it will normally just be the capital city of your state or country. So for example, for me it would be London. Then for your keyboard layout, you can change that if it's different to the one for your region. Then you can choose whether to do a normal or minimal installation. You'll probably want normal, but I'll go with minimal just to save time. Then you can choose which disk to install on, and it won't let you for Ubuntu, but with some other ones you could accidentally install it over your Ventoy drive, so just make sure not to do that. And you can either install alongside an OS that's already on there, replace a partition, or erase the disk, which is what I'm going to do. And you can choose whether to disable or enable swap, and choose your file system. BetterFS has slightly better performance, but ext4 is good enough for most people, but you could also go with XFS if you wanted to. Then you can enter the full name for your user, and change your username or your machine name if you want to. Then you can put in your password and choose whether to log in automatically if you want. And then it gives you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with it, you can just go ahead and hit install, and now you can let it do its thing. Then once it's done, you can either exit to the live environment or restart immediately, which is what I'm going to do. And we're in Lubuntu. There's a manual on the desktop if you want to learn more about what you can do and how it works, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So this is Manjaro KDE, so you can set up your time zone, keyboard layout, and locale and language before you boot into the system, and you could boot with proprietary drivers, which is for stuff like modern Nvidia cards, but most people would just let it boot with open source. And then it gives you a welcome screen where you can read documentation and such, and you can just go ahead and launch the installer. And while it's loading modules, you can go ahead and select your locale. And it might warn you about not being connected to the internet, but that doesn't really matter. Then you can select your region, and you can click on it on the map. Normally it'll just default to the capital city of your country or state. And then you can just hit next. And then you can change your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. Then, for partitioning, make sure to choose the right disk so you don't accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive. You can either install alongside an OS that's already there, replace a partition, configure stuff manually, or just erase the disk, which is what I'm going to do. You can choose whether to swap to a file, swap without hibernation, or swap with hibernation. I'd recommend swapping with hibernation. And then you can choose your file system. BetterFS has the best performance out of all of these, but ext4 is good enough for most people. F2FS is the file system that Android uses, which means your Linux partition would be readable from Windows if you're dual booting that. Or you can also use XFS, but for most people ext4 is good. And then you can also choose to encrypt your system if you want. And then you can enter the full name for your user. And then you can change your username or machine name if you want to. And then you can enter your password and choose whether to log in automatically without your password or to use the same password for the admin account. Then you can choose your Office suite, and I'm just not going to go with one to save time installing. Then it will give you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with that, then you can hit install and let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either continue using the live environment or restart immediately, which is what I'll do. And then it will give you a welcome screen where you can read the documentation, get support or get involved if you want to, or you could view what applications it has. And yeah, that's Manjaro. This is Nobara, which is a more gaming-focused distro built for better performance and drivers for things like Nvidia cards. So I'm just going to test this media and start. The media test normally takes about 10 seconds, give or take, although if you're using something slower like a USB or an SD card, then it could take like a minute. And Nobara just boots up with the installer already here, and while it's loading modules you can go ahead and change your locale. Although apparently Nobara has less locales than normal, because it's Britishist. There's no British. I'm very disappointed. And then once it's loaded everything, you can just hit next. And then you can select your region by just clicking on the map. And normally it will just be the capital of the state or country you're in. And then you can change your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. And then you can enter the full name for your user. For Nobara it's a pretty bad design because it looks like the input boxes are greyed out. And if you want, you can change your username or your device name. Then you can use your password. And if you want, you can reuse your password as the admin password, or log in automatically without your password. Then you can choose your disk and make sure you don't accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive. And you can either install alongside what OS is already there, replace a partition, do the partitioning yourself, or erase the disk, which is what I'll do, and you can configure whether to have no swap, swap to a file, no hibernation, or with hibernation. I'd recommend with hibernation, unless you have very low disk space. Then you can choose your file system. The default for Nobara is BetterFS, which has the highest performance. ext4 is good for most people, and you can also do XFS or ZFS. But I'm going to go with BetterFS because it's the default. Then it gives you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with all that, you can go ahead and hit install and let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either continue using the live environment or restart immediately, and I'll do that. Then it gives you a welcome screen where you can update your system, configure drivers and tweaks, or install more apps. There are some recommended additions such as Blender, a video editor, OBS and Discord. There are some optional stuff like compatibility layers and DaVinci Resolve. There's a troubleshooting and issues page if you ever encounter problems. You can join the community if you want, and you could even contribute yourself. And it might complain about not having an internet connection. But yeah, that is Nobara. This is Pop! OS, and the boot menu only has one option, which is try or install Pop! OS, so let's do that. Now we are in Pop! OS, and we can go ahead and launch the installer. But yeah, you can go and select your language, then you can select your locale, and you can change your keyboard layout if it isn't the same as your region. Then you can either do a clean install or a custom install. I'm going to do a clean install. Then you can select your drive and make sure not to accidentally select your Ventoy one. Then you can put in the full name for your user, and then the password for your account, and then for drive encryption you can either set it to the same as your user account password, have a different password, or just don't encrypt, which I'm going to do, and then it will go ahead and do its thing. Then once it's done, you can restart your device to continue setting up. Then there's a little welcome window. You can choose whether to have your dock extending to the edges like the Windows 11 taskbar, have it not extend to the edges like macOS, or just not have a dock. I'm going to leave it as the default setting. Then you can choose whether or not to show the workspaces button, which just switches between workspaces, the applications button, which shows your applications, and the position of the date and time notifications position. So you could have it over there, or in the middle where I'm going to leave it. And then you can open and switch applications from the launcher. You can use gestures for easier navigation, such as forefinger swipe right to open applications. And you can choose between light and dark theme. And then you can connect to Wi-Fi if you want, but I'm not going to. And then you can choose whether to allow location services. Then you can select your time zone. And usually this is just going to be the capital city of your country or state. And then you can just start using Pop! OS. And that is it. This is Ubuntu, where you can either start it normally in safe graphics, or do an OEM install where it installs for someone else. But we're just going to go ahead and start it normally. You can try or install Ubuntu, and I'm going to select install. Then you can choose your keyboard layout. And then you can connect to Wi-Fi if you want. Then you can choose whether to have a normal or minimal installation. You'll probably want normal, but I'm going to go with minimal just to save time. And if you have an internet connection, you can download updates while installing, or install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware and some media formats. Then, if there's already an OS, you can either install alongside it, erase and install, or configure it yourself. I'm just going to erase disk and install, and then select the disk you want to install on, and remember not to accidentally erase your Ventoy drive. Then it will give you a confirmation box, so you can just hit continue. Then you can select your region by clicking on the map. It will just default to the capital city of your state or country. Then you can enter the full name for your user. And then you can change your device name or username if you want. And then you can set your password, and you can choose to log in automatically without your password if you want. And now you can just let it do its thing. And then once it's done, it'll ask you to restart. Then you can enable Ubuntu Pro, which is kind of pointless really. And then you can send your system info to a company, or you can not. Then you can allow location services, or you can not. And then you can use software to install apps that aren't loading. So yeah, that is Ubuntu. This is Xubuntu, which you can start normally or with safe graphics. I'm just going to go ahead and start it normally. And now you're in Xubuntu, and you can just go ahead and open the installer. Then you can choose your language. You can choose your keyboard layout. Then you can connect to the internet if you want to. Then you can either have an interactive installation or an automated installation if you have an install script. Then you can choose whether to have the full installation or the minimal installation. You'll probably want full, but I'll go with minimal to save time. Then you can choose whether to install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware, such as NVIDIA drivers. And if you have an internet connection, you can also install support for additional media formats. Then, if there's already an OS, you can either install Xubuntu alongside it, configure it manually, or erase disk and install, which is what I'm going to do. Then you can select which disk you want to install on. Just make sure not to accidentally erase your Ventoy drive. Then you can enter the full name for your account, and then you can change your computer's name or your username if you want to. Then you can enter your password and choose whether or not to automatically log in. Then you can choose your time zone, and it will just default to the capital city of your state or country. Then it will give you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with it, you can just go ahead and hit install, and then it's going to do its thing. Then once it's done installing, you can either continue using the live environment or restart immediately, which is what I'll do. And now you're in Xubuntu. If I had the full installation instead of the minimal installation, I'd probably be getting a guide of it, but because it's the minimal one, I don't. And yeah, that's it. Okay, this one is Archcraft, and I should warn you that this one beeps when you first boot into it, so just be ready for that. And you can either boot with normal drivers, fully open source drivers, NVIDIA drivers, or safe graphics. Right, now it gives us a welcome to Archcraft screen, and you can either get started, launch the installer, or launch ABIF, and I am just going to go and launch the installer. So now, once it's started loading modules, you can go ahead and choose your locale. Then once it's done that, you can hit next. And then you can select your region, which will normally default to the capital city of your state or country. And then you can change your keyboard layout if it's not the same as your region. Then you can choose which window manager to use, OpenBox or BSPWM, or you could go with both if you want to. I'm just going to go with OpenBox. And then if there's another OS on the disk, you can either install alongside it, replace a partition, configure partitions yourself, or erase the disk, which is what I'll do. And make sure you don't accidentally select your Ventoy drive. And you can choose your swap, whether to not allow hibernation, allow hibernation, or swap to a file. I'm going to choose to allow hibernation. And then your file system, you can have ext4, which is good enough for most users, BetterFS, which is more complicated but has slightly better performance, JFS, F2FS, which would make your Linux partition readable on Windows, or XFS, and you can also choose to encrypt the system if you want. Then you can enter the full name for your user, and you can change your username or device name if you want to. Then you can enter your password. You can auto log in without your password if you want, or you could use a different password for the admin account. Then it gives you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're sure you're happy with that, you can just hit install and let it do its thing. Okay, once it's done, you can either continue using the live environment or restart immediately, which is what I'll do. And then it gives you a little welcome screen. You can read the wiki, read some tutorials, or go into the gallery if you want, but yeah, that is Archcraft. Okay, this is Artix, and in the boot menu for the installation media, you can set up your time zone, your keyboard layout, and your language before you boot, but because I won't be using the live environment for very long, I'm not going to bother with that and just boot from the CD DVD ISO file, because on Ventoy it's stored in an ISO file. But if you're booting from the image directly on a USB or hard drive, you can select the other option. And then it gives you a welcome screen, which you can skip because we haven't installed it yet. And then you can go and click on the... and then you can launch the installer from the icon on the desktop, and if you're connected to Wi-Fi or Ethernet, you can do an online installation option, but because that's experimental, it is recommended to do offline, which is what I'll do. And then while it's loading modules, you can select your locale. And then once it's done that, you can hit next. Select your region, which will normally default to the capital city of your state or country. Change your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. Select the disk you want to partition and make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy disk. You can either install alongside an OS that's already on there, replace a partition, or do the partitioning yourself. So what I'm going to do is, if you have a blank disk, there'll likely just be an option to do automatic partitioning, but because this isn't blank, I'm going to select my file system. BetterFS has the best performance but is slightly more complicated, so ext4 is fine for most users. F2FS makes the Linux partition readable on Windows, and XFS is just another one you can use, and you can also encrypt the system if you want. So I'm going to choose the partition that I want to replace, and then hit next. And then I'm going to enter the full name for my user, and then you can change the username or device name if you want to. Then you can put in your password. If you want, you can require strong passwords for extra security, auto login without the password, and use the same password for the admin account. Then it will give you a summary of what it's going to do. And then if you're happy with it, then you can just hit install and let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either continue using the live environment or restart immediately, which is what I'll do. And then it gives you a welcome screen. It shows you how to access the internet from an icon that isn't there because it has a customized environment. It's simple by default, powerful when needed. Then you can choose how much information you want to share with the people who make the desktop environment, but it's disabled by default. And yeah, that is Artix. This is Garuda, and for whatever reason, this version just doesn't boot if you boot it in normal mode with Ventoy, so you have to use grub2 mode. And then you can set your time zone, keyboard layout, and language before you boot, but since we're not going to be in the environment for long, I'm not going to do that. And then you can either boot with open source drivers or allow proprietary drivers such as NVIDIA GPUs. But this thing has Intel integrated graphics, so we're going to go with open source drivers. Okay, and once it boots, we get a welcome screen where we can do a bunch of different things, but the one that we will want to do is install Garuda Linux. And then once it sets up modules, you can select your locale. And then once that's done, it might warn you about being connected to the internet. You don't need to be, but then you can just hit next. Then you can select your region, which normally just defaults to the capital city of your state or country. Then you can change your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. Then you can select the disk to install on, make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive, which helpfully the Garuda installer doesn't let you install on. And you can either install alongside an existing OS, replace a partition, do the partitioning yourself, or erase the disk, which is what I'm going to do. And you can configure whether to enable hibernation or not, which I will. Then you can enter the full name for your user, and you can change your username or machine name if you want. Then you can enter your password, and you can configure auto login without your password if you want, or use the same password for the administrator account. Then it gives you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with it, then you can hit install and let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either continue using the live environment or start immediately, which is what I'm going to do. And then it gives you a welcome screen, although it does have to be connected to the internet to do that, so I'm not going to go through it. But then it gives you another welcome thing where you can perform system maintenance, configure your settings, gaming apps, boot tools, diagnostics, network tools, the setup assistant, and the start page, and there's a bunch of other sections as well that you can go through and have a look around. But yeah, that was Garuda. Okay, this is KDE Neon, and you can either boot normally or in safe graphics, or do an OEM install if you're installing for someone else. Then you can just click the install system icon, and while it's loading modules, you can configure your locale. And then, once it's done, it might give you a warning about not being connected to the internet, but that doesn't really matter, so you can hit next. Then you can select your region, which will normally just default to the capital city of your state or country. Then you can change your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. Then you can choose the disk you want to install on, and make sure not to overwrite your Ventoy disk, although it isn't shown for the KDE Neon installer. And you can either install alongside an existing OS, replace a partition, do the partitioning yourself, or erase the disk, which is what I'll do, and you can choose whether to enable hibernation or not, or encrypt the system if you wish. Then you can enter the full name for your user, and you can change your username or device name if you want to. Then you can put in your password, and if you want, you can check login automatically without asking for the password. Then you can hit install and let it do its thing, although apparently that means it opens the welcome dialog again. Then once it's done, you can either continue using the live environment or restart immediately, which is what I'm going to do. Then it gives you a welcome screen. You can access the internet with the Wi-Fi icon if you want. Simple by default, powerful when needed. And then you can find apps if you want to. And then change how much data is shared with the people who make the desktop environment, which by default is none. And yeah, that is KDE Neon. This is LMDE or Linux Mint Debian edition, and you can either start it normally or in compatibility mode. Then you can go ahead and install Linux Mint on the desktop. Now you just need to select your language and locale. Then you can select your time zone by clicking on your country or state. Then you can change your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. Then you can enter the full name for your user. And then enter your device's name. And you can change your username if you want. And then you can enter your password. And then you can choose to log in automatically without your password if you want. And you can also encrypt your home folder if you want to do that. Then you can either do the partitioning yourself or do an automated installation. Then you can choose which disk to install on. Make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive. Then you can choose whether to use LVM, which is just a more advanced partitioning method. Then this will delete all the data on the disk. It will give you a confirmation dialog, and if you're sure that you've done everything correctly, you can go ahead and hit yes. Then you can choose what disk to install the bootloader on if you want it to be a different one. Then it will give you a summary of what it's going to do, and then you can just go ahead and hit install and let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either continue using the live environment or just restart. Then you can go through this startup screen that it shows. You can change your color theme, take some system snapshots, install codecs, updates, change your settings, install some more software or configure the firewall. You could read the documentation or release notes. You could go to the web forums or chat room for support, or you could even contribute to it yourself. And yeah, that was LMDE. Okay, this is MX Linux, and you can configure your language, keyboard and time zone before you boot into the media. And then you can just go ahead and boot. And then you can go ahead and launch the installer. Then you can change your keyboard settings if you want to. Then you can either do custom partitioning or regular install using the entire disk. Make sure you choose the correct disk and don't accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive. And then you can encrypt it or enable hibernation support if you want. Then it will give you a confirmation dialog, and if you're sure you're happy with everything, then you can hit start. And the cool thing about the MX installer is it does the installation as you're configuring it, so you don't have to wait so long. So if you want, you can change your computer's name, your domain, which for most people doesn't matter, so you can just leave it as it is. enable a Samba server for Microsoft networking if you want, and change your workgroup name. But most of that isn't important to most people, so I just leave it as the default. Then, if you want, you can change your locale, time zone, if you didn't already configure it in the boot menu, and check whether your system clock uses local time or not. Then you can enter the username, which is not the full name for your user. I would recommend that it only contain lowercase letters. Then you can enter your password. You can choose whether to enable or disable the root or administrator account. I'm going to enable it and give it the same password. You can choose whether to save any changes you made in the live environment, if any, or enable auto login without the password. And then you can just let it do its thing as it installs. And then once it's done, you can check whether to automatically reboot the system when you close the installer, and hit finish. Then it shows a welcome screen where you can look at popular apps, go to the forums, see videos of the distro, read the wiki or the manual or FAQ, and just mess around with the system. And yeah, that is MX Linux. Okay, this is Solus, and it gives you an option to boot normally with safe graphics or with NVIDIA drivers. And then it gives you a welcome screen, which is not needed at the moment because we haven't installed it yet. So you can just open the install system icon on the desktop, and while it's loading modules, you can change your locale. And then once it's done that, it might give you a warning about not being connected to the internet, but that doesn't really matter, and you can just hit next. Then you can select your region by clicking on the map, and it normally defaults to the capital city of your state or country. Then you can change your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. Then you can choose the disk you want to install on, make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive, and you can either install alongside an existing OS, replace a partition, do the partitioning yourself, or erase the disk. And then you can choose whether to not have any swap, allow hibernation, or not allow hibernation. And then you can choose your file system. BetterFS is more complicated, but allows slightly more performance. ext4 is good enough for most users, and F2FS allows your Linux partition to be read from Windows because it's the same file system that Android uses. And you can also encrypt the system if you want. Then you can enter the full name for your user, and you can change your username or device name if you want. Then you can enter your password and choose to auto login without a password if you want. Then it will give you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with that, you can just hit install and let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either continue using the live environment or restart immediately, which I'll do. Then it gives you this welcome screen, which we're going to go through. You can access the internet with the Wi-Fi icon. Simple by default, powerful when needed. You can choose how much data gets sent to the people who make the desktop environment, which by default is none. And yeah, that is Solus. This is Tuxedo OS. You can either enter the live mode normally, or enter it in fallback mode for older NVIDIA cards. Tuxedo OS is the only distro in this video that is not in US English by default. Instead, it is in German, but that is pretty easy to change, as you can just set your locale. Then, you can choose your region by clicking on the map, but it defaults to the capital city of your state or country. Then you can change your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. Then you can either have it in X11 mode, or hidden under an advanced button, Wayland mode. There isn't really much of a difference between these two, but X11 is the default, so I'm just going to leave it as that. And now you're in the proper live environment, and you can just go ahead and open the Tuxedo installer on the desktop, and you can use it with or without encryption. I'm going to do it without, but it's up to you. And because for some reason it doesn't remember, you can change your locale again while it's loading modules. And then once it's done that, it might warn you about not being connected to the internet, but that doesn't really matter, so you can just hit next. Then you can choose which disk to install on. It doesn't show it for Tuxedo OS, but make sure not to overwrite your Ventoy disk. Then you can either install alongside an existing OS, replace a partition, do the partitioning yourself, or erase the disk. Then you can choose whether or not to enable swap, which basically just gives you a bit of extra performance. Then you can choose your file system. BetterFS has slightly more performance and it's a bit more complicated, but ext4 is fine for most users, and there's also XFS if you want to do that. Then you can enter the full name for your user. You can change your username or machine name if you want. Then you can put in your password. You can choose or not whether to require strong passwords, or to log in automatically without asking for the password. Then, again, you can choose whether to use X11 or Wayland. I'm going to use X11 because it's the default. Then it will give you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with it, you can go ahead and hit install and let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either continue using the live environment or restart immediately, which I'm going to do. And that is Tuxedo OS. This is Zorin OS. You can either boot it normally with safe graphics or with modern NVIDIA drivers. Now with this one, it does check the sums of all the files in the boot media before it finishes. If you want to, you can press Ctrl-C to cancel it, but it really doesn't take that long. Then you can either try or install Zorin OS. I'm going to install. Then you can choose your keyboard layout. Then you can connect to Wi-Fi if you want. I'm not going to. Then you can choose whether or not to install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware and some media formats. If you are connected to the internet, you can download updates while installing to save time afterwards. And you can choose whether or not to participate in the census, which lets the developers of Zorin OS count the number of users they have. Then you can install Zorin OS alongside an existing OS, configure the partitions yourself, or erase disk and install, which I'm going to do. Then you can choose which disk you want to install on, make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive. Then it'll give you a confirmation pop-up, so if you're absolutely happy with what it's going to do, hit continue. Then you can choose your region by clicking on the map. Normally it defaults to the capital city of your state or country. Then you can enter the full name for your user, change your device's name or username if you want to, enter your password, and set it to auto login without the password if you want to, and then you can just let it do its thing. Then, once it's done, you can go ahead and restart. Then you can start the tour of Zorin OS. You can open the menu to launch apps, choose your desktop look, connect your online accounts, link your phone and computer, use software to find and install apps, and yeah, that is Zorin OS. This is Debian. Now, there are two main editions of Debian, the NetInst version and the DVD version. The DVD version contains all files on the disk but is a little bit slower and does not require internet, and the NetInst version, which I'll be using, is a lot smaller image and it's faster to set up, but it does require internet, so just make note of that, and I'm sure you'll know what edition you're using from the file name. And also, this one does beep when you first boot into it, so just be ready for that. And you can either install with just a text interface, or a graphical install, which most people will want. Then you can choose your language. Then you can select your location. And then you can choose your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. Then, if your Ethernet is connected, you can just select your Ethernet adapter and it will set it up automatically. But if you're using Wi-Fi, you can select your wireless adapter and hit continue. Select your network. Choose your security type. For most people, it will be the bottom one because most networks have a password. Then, enter your password. Then you can set your host name and your domain name if you have to. Most people don't need one, so you can just leave it blank. Then you can set the root password if you want to. If you don't, then the root account will just be locked. I'm not going to, because if you don't set a root password, then it just lets the main user run commands as root. Then you can put your user's full name. Then you can change your username if you want. Then you can enter your password. And then, if there is free space on the disk you want to install on, you can just use the largest continuous free space. But most people will want to use the entire disk, although you could also set up LVM or encrypted LVM, which is just a more advanced partitioning method, or manually configure the partitions yourself if you want to. Then select the disk to install on, make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive. Then you can choose whether to have all your files in one partition, which I would recommend as it's just the simplest option, a separate home partition, or a separate home, var, and temp partition. Then it will give you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with that, you can select Finish Partitioning and write changes to disk. And then it'll ask you to confirm again, so you can just check yes and hit continue. And then once it's done that, you can select a region for the package manager to use for mirrors. You can choose your specific mirror if you want to, but I'd just go with the top one. Then you can enter your proxy if you have one. Most people don't, so you can just leave it blank. Then you can choose whether to participate in the package usage survey. I just pick no. Then you can choose which desktop environment to install. The main ones are GNOME or GNOME for a more Mac-like experience, KDE Plasma for a highly customizable Windows-like experience, and AlexQt for a more lightweight Windows experience. I'm going to go with KDE Plasma, and there are also some other ones that I'm not going to explain, but those are the main three. And you could also install a web server, an SSH server, and the selection of standard system utilities, which I'm going to uncheck just to save time, but you guys will probably want them. Then once it's done, you can just hit continue to reboot. And you're in. That is Debian. This is Kali Linux, and before we start, I know that Kali is infamous for, to put it bluntly, little kids installing it, thinking that it will make them look like an epic hacker. And if you are actually a cybersecurity person and you know what you're doing with these tools, you can continue watching. But if you just want to use Kali because you think it will make you look cool, just use Mint with btop installed. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, this does beep twice when you boot into it, so just be ready for that. And you can either do a graphical install or a text-based install, but most people will just want a graphical install. Then you can choose your language, choose your location, choose your key map. Then you can choose whether to use an Ethernet connection or a Wi-Fi connection. If your Ethernet isn't connected and you don't want to use an internet connection, you can just select the Ethernet connection. It might give you an error, but you can just hit continue. And then you can choose do not configure network at this time. Then you can enter your host name, enter the full name for your user, change your username if you want, enter your password, if there's free space on the disk you want to install on, you can just choose use the largest continuous free space, but most people will want use entire disk. You could also set up LVM or encrypted LVM, which is basically just a more advanced partitioning method, or manually configure the partitions yourself. Then you can choose which disk you want to install on, make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive. Then you can either have all files in one partition, which I would recommend as it's just the easiest one, a separate home partition, or separate home, var, and temp partitions. Then, if you're happy with the changes it lists in the summary, you can finish partitioning and write changes to disks, and it'll ask you to confirm that again. Then you can choose your desktop environment. You can either have XFCE, which is the default desktop environment, and a Windows-like experience, GNOME or GNOME, which is a more Mac-like experience, and KDE Plasma, which is a highly customizable Windows-like experience. Then you could either have just the top 10 tools, or all available tools. I'm just going to go with the top 10 to save time. Then, once it's done, you can just hit continue to reboot. And you're in. That is Kali Linux. This is, I'm going to be honest, I don't really know how to pronounce this one. Mageia. I'm just going to call it Mageia. But yeah, you can either install the system, rescue, or do a memory test. Then it just needs to detect storage devices. Then you can select your language, agree to the license, choose your keyboard layout, choose the device to install on, make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventor drive, and you can either use existing partitions, do custom partitioning yourself, or erase and use the entire disk. Then it'll just do a confirmation dialog. Then you can choose whether to configure a supplementary installation medium if you have one, but most people don't. Then you can enable more media if you want. Then you can choose your desktop environment, Plasma for a highly customizable Windows-like experience, GNOME or GNOME for a more Mac-like experience, or custom. Then you can just let it do its thing. Then you can set the root password, which actually has security requirements. You can choose the icon for your user. There are quite a few of them, but I'm going to go with the purple one. You can enter your user's full name, and you can change the login name if you want. Then you can enter their password. Then you can choose a monitor. For most people, you'll just want to pick plug and play since it'll detect it automatically, but if you want, you could go with a generic one, for example, VMs, or your specific vendor. Then, if you're happy with all of this, you can click Next. Then you can choose whether or not you want to set up online media, although that would require an internet connection, so I'm not going to, but you can if you want. Then, congratulations, installation is complete. Now you can go ahead and press the reboot button. But yeah, you can go through media sources, update the system, MCC, install software, applications, and a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, that is Mageia. This is NixOS, and you can start the installer normally with safe graphics and a bunch of other options. And then NixOS actually does require an internet connection. If you have Ethernet, it'll already be set up, but if you have Wi-Fi, you can go ahead and connect to it now. And then it'll ask you for an encryption style, but I would just go with the first one since this is only for the live environment. And then you can just put whatever password you want here. Again, it doesn't really matter because it's the live environment only. Then, while it's setting up modules, you can go ahead and select your locale. And then once it's finished doing that, you can just hit next. Select your location by clicking on the map. It will normally just default to the capital city of your state or country. Select your keyboard layout if it's different to your region. Enter the full name for your user. Enter your password. You can also change your username if you like. You can turn off the option to require strong passwords, enable auto-login without the password, and reuse your password for the admin account. Choose your desktop environment. There's GNOME or GNOME for a more Mac-like experience, KDE Plasma for a highly customizable Windows experience, KDE Plasma version 5, which is just KDE Plasma but less actively developed and long-term support, XFCE, Pantheon, Cinnamon, Mate, Enlightenment, LXQT for a more lightweight Windows experience, Budgie and Deepin Desktop, or alternatively you just could have no desktop environment and use it with just the terminal, but I'm going to go with KDE Plasma. Then you can allow unfree software such as NVIDIA drivers. Then you can choose the disk to install on, make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive. You can either install alongside an existing OS, replace a partition, do the partitioning yourself, or erase the entire disk. And you can either have no swap, not allow hibernation, or allow hibernation, which I'm going to do. And you can choose to encrypt the system if you want. Then it will give you a summary of what it's going to do, and if you're happy with all of that, you can go ahead and hit install and let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can either continue using the live environment or restart immediately. And you're in. That is NixOS. This is Omarchy, and this is yet another one that you have to boot in Grub 2 mode, because for some reason it doesn't boot properly if you boot it in normal mode. So yeah, in Grub 2 mode you can either boot it normally or with speech. So I'm just going to do the first one. Then you need to select your keyboard layout. Then you can enter your username. Then you can enter your password. And enter it again to confirm. Then you can enter your user's full name. Then you can enter your email address, which is used for Git authentication. For most people I would just skip this. Enter your device name. You can just hit return to use the default name of Omarchy. Then you can enter your time zone. And yeah, if this looks right, then you can go ahead and hit yes, or you could just do no, change it. Then you can choose the device to install on. make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive. Then you can either yes format disk or no change it. And now you can just let it do its thing. And then once it's done, it gives you a nice little animation, and you can just go ahead and hit enter to reboot. Then you can go ahead and enter your password. And that's it, you're in. That is Omarchy. This is OpenSUSE. Now you can either upgrade from a previous version of OpenSUSE, or just install normally, which is what I'm going to do. Now you can select your keyboard layout, select your network adapter. You can either do Ethernet if it's connected or Wi-Fi, and if you don't want to use an internet connection, you can just select Ethernet. Then you can select your desktop environment. KDE Plasma is a highly customizable Windows-like experience. GNOME or GNOME is a more Mac-like experience, and XFCE is a more lightweight Windows-like experience. I'm going to go with KDE Plasma because that's the default. Then you can go through guided setup for partitioning, even though it does have its own automatic configuration. And for each disk, it says choose what to do with existing Linux partitions and other partitions, and you can either have do not modify, remove if needed, and remove even if not needed. So I want to use the entire disk, so I'm going to choose remove even if not needed. Then you can enable LVM, which is basically just a more advanced partitioning method, or disk encryption. And you can choose your file system. ext2 and ext3 are pretty old, but still decent. I just wouldn't recommend them because ext4 is just a newer version of them. BetterFS is slightly better for performance, but a lot more complicated, so ext4 is fine for most users. And you can also have XFS. If you want, you could have a separate home partition and a separate swap partition, and you could enlarge it to the RAM size to allow suspending and hibernation. Then once you're happy with your configuration, you can hit next. Then you can select your region and time zone if it hasn't already configured it. Then you can enter the full name for your user. You can change your username if you want. You can enter your password. You could use this password for the system administrator, or enable automatic login without your password. And because my password is so secure, it's warned me about it, but you guys probably won't get this. And once you're happy with the configuration and the summary it's given, you can just go ahead and hit install and let it do its thing. Then once it's done, it will automatically reboot after 10 seconds. And you get a welcome screen. You can read the guide or the documentation, get software, contribute to OpenSUSE or donate, and yeah, that is OpenSUSE. This is VanillaOS. You can either install it normally with safe graphics or with Nouveau unloaded. And now you get this welcome screen. So you can either install a custom image, or go into recovery. I'm just going to go ahead and install. Then you can choose your language. You can choose your keyboard layout. Then this one does require an internet connection. If you have an Ethernet cable plugged in, it will have detected it already. But if not, you can just click on your Wi-Fi network and it will bring you to the settings. Then you can just put in your Wi-Fi password. Then you can select your time zone. Then you can choose which disk to install on. Make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy disk. You can either use the entire disk or configure partitions manually. Then you need to confirm your changes. Then you can choose whether or not to encrypt your device. Then you can confirm all your settings, and then let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can go ahead and reboot. Then it gives you a welcome screen, where you can name your device. Then you can enter the full name for your user. You can change your username if you want. Then you can enter your password. And now you can just log in. And then you get another setup screen. But you do need an internet connection for it, which it forgets after the live environment. So if you're using Wi-Fi, you'll have to set it up again. Then you can choose whether you want light or dark theme. Then you can choose which applications you want. I'm just going to have all of them off to save time. Then once it's done, you can either take a tool or just exit to the desktop. You can configure updates if you want, open the store, develop the way you like, get an overview, configure your device, connect online accounts, or visit the blog. And yeah, that is VanillaOS. Okay, this is Alpine Linux. It only has one boot entry and it boots automatically after a second. But yeah, we are now in the territory of the expert distros, so everything from here on is going to be command line based. So if you don't like that, don't pick an expert distro. Then you can just log in as root, and then you can just type setup-alpine to start the setup program, and then to select a keyboard layout, you can just enter your keyboard layout. Oh whoops, I forgot it's not UK, it's GB. Then you can select your variant if your keyboard layout has variants. And then you can enter your system hostname, or just press enter to set it to localhost. Then you can choose which network device to initialize. Normally there will be two, ETH0 and WLAN0 for Ethernet and Wi-Fi. If you have an Ethernet cable plugged in, you can choose ETH0, but I'm using Wi-Fi, so I'm going to choose WLAN 0. Then it's going to scan for wireless networks. Then you can put the number of the network you want to connect to, and then enter the password. Then you can either enter the IP address manually, or just press enter to automatically configure it. Then you can choose to initialize another internet device, or just type done. Then you can choose whether to do any manual network configuration, and then enter the root password, or just the password for the administrator account. Then you can type your time zone, so for example, mine would be Europe/London. And then you can set your proxy URL if you have one, or just press enter for none. Then you can choose which NTP client to run. I am going to do Cronny, but if you're not sure, just press enter to do the default of BusyBox. Then you can enter a mirror number or URL, or enter F to find and use the fastest mirror. Then you can set up a user. You can either press enter to just use root, or enter a lowercase login name. Then you can enter the full name for that user. Then enter the password for that user. And then you can enter the SSH key or URL for the user if they have one, or just press enter for none. Then you can choose which SSH server you want. If you're not sure, just press enter for the default. Then choose which disk you want to use to install Alpine on. So for me it would be NVMe 0 and 1. Then enter how you'd like to use it, and if you're only using one disk, I would type sys for system. Then confirm that you want to erase the above disks and continue. And it's done. Installation is complete, and you can go ahead and press Ctrl or Delete to reboot. And now, if you just want to continue using it like this, you can log in with your user. But if you want to set up a desktop environment, log in as root and type setup-desktop. Then you can choose your desktop environment. I'm going to go with LXQT. And then, once it's done, you can go ahead and reboot again by pressing Ctrl or Delete. And you're in. That is Alpine Linux. This is Arch Linux. This is another one that beeps when you first boot into it, so prepare yourself for that. Now, if you have an Ethernet cable plugged into your device, good for you, you don't have to do this bit. But for people who need to use Wi-Fi, type IWCTL station list, and there should be a device showing up. Then IWCTL station, the name of the device, get-networks, I mistyped it, and then IWCTL station device name connect, and then the name of your network. Then it'll ask you for the password. Although one thing you should remember is if your password has a special character in it, remember that by default The installation environment uses the US keyboard layout. And now I'm going to go and clear my screen. Now you're going to want to type pacman-key-init and pacman-key-populate. Now you'll want to do pacman-uppercase S lowercase y Arch Linux -keyring, and now the final command, arch install. Then you can choose your language, which is already English, so I don't have to worry about that. Your locales, keyboard layout, your locale language, and your locale encoding, but most people don't have to worry about that. Your mirror region, or custom mirrors if you want. Your disk configuration. Now you can either use partitions that are already there if you've done that, manually partition the disks yourself, or use a best ever default partition layout, which most people will want to do. Then select the disk you want to install on, make sure not to accidentally overwrite your Ventoy drive. Select your file system. BetterFS has slightly better performance but is more complicated, so ext4 is fine for most people. F2FS means that your Linux partition is readable from Windows, and XFS is just another one you can have. I'd just recommend to go with ext4. You could have a separate home partition if you want, but I'm not going to, just because it's less complicated. And you can enable disk encryption if you want. You could choose to enable or disable swap. And now you can choose your bootloader. Systemd boot is the default, but if I'm honest, it's not that good compared to the other three. Grub is just more graphical and can have themes and everything. It's a lot more customizable. Limine and EFI stub are just really fast, although technically EFI stub isn't a bootloader and it can only boot into one thing. So if you want to boot more than one thing, I would just go with Limine. And then you can change your host name, set the password for the root account, which is basically just the admin account. Enter the username for the user. This isn't the full name, so it's just all lowercase. Enter the password, and should they be a super user, if you want them to have admin privileges, yes. Confirm and exit. Profile. I'm pretty sure that everyone watching this video would be using it for desktop, so now you can just choose your desktop environment. The main ones are GNOME or GNOME for a Mac-like experience, Hyperland as a tiling window manager, but this is pretty advanced, KDE Plasma for a highly customizable Windows-like experience, which I would recommend, and LXQT for a more lightweight Windows experience, and I'm going to go with KDE Plasma. Now your graphics driver, all open source, just combines all of the open source ones, however it is prone to breaking. AMD ATI is if you either have an AMD CPU or an AMD graphics card. Intel is obviously if you're using Intel graphics. NVIDIA has 3 different ones, the open source driver, the open kernel module for newer GPUs, or the proprietary module, which is basically for new and old GPUs. I'm going to go with Intel because this thing has Intel integrated graphics. And then you can change your greeter. SDDM is by far the most supported and most customizable. GDM just sucks unless you're using GNOME or GNOME as your desktop environment. LY is basically just a terminal interface, but it is very lightweight. LightDM is basically a balance between LY and SDDM, where it's just lightweight and customizable as well. But I'd just go with SDDM unless you have a really bad machine. And And then audio, you can choose your audio server. They're both good, but I go with Pulse Audio. You could change to a different kernel, Linux LTS for longer support, Linux Zen for a more gaming-focused kernel, or Linux Hardened for a more security-focused kernel, but most people will just want the default Linux kernel. Network configuration, you can either copy the configuration to the installation, however this won't install a network manager, which will make configuring networks a lot more tricky. Manual configuration, which I don't know why you do that, or to just use Network Manager, which lets you configure the internet graphically and easily. Then any additional packages, you can just type the name of any additional packages you want. So for example, I will want Git, just so I can run the post install script that I will be showing after this. Optional repositories, multilib is for 32-bit applications, and many applications require them as dependencies, and testing is for newer, unstable versions of apps. So for me, I just enable multilib, but it's up to you. Time zone, you just set your time zone. I am going to go all the way up. Oh, I've gone past it, and there's a tad bit of lag from how much holding I've been doing. But yeah, Europe, London. You can choose whether to enable or disable NTP. If you don't know what that means, just don't worry about it, or do some Googling. And then you can either save your configuration to a file if you want, abort if you decided you've made a horrible mistake, or go ahead and hit install. Then, final confirmation, hit yes, and off we go. Now, Arch typically installs pretty quickly compared to other distros, so yeah, just let it do its thing. And then once it's done, you can see it through into your installation without rebooting if you want to, but that will basically just leave you with a terminal and some things might not work. And then, once you're done, you can just press Ctrl-Alt-Delete to reboot. And you get a welcome thing that you can go through. You can access the internet with the Wi-Fi icon. Simple by default, powerful when needed. You can find apps in the Discover app. You can choose how much data gets sent to the people who make the desktop environment. This is specifically if you chose KDE Plasma, by the way, and it's disabled by default. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the basic installation. And you might notice that some apps, such as a web browser, are missing. So time for the post-install script. Now, you will need an internet connection, so if you have Wi-Fi, you're going to want to set that up again, but it will be a lot easier this time. And now, you're going to want to open a terminal app, for example console, and then, if you haven't installed Git already, by adding it to the extra packages list, you can just do it by going sudo pacman -S y git, although because you're running it as a normal user now, you will need to enter your password. And then you'll want to run git clone https://github.com/Jared Dinosaur with a capital J and D /JDAP, and then CD JDAP python jdap.py, and this is my very epic post-install script, which basically just installs a bunch of essential packages, and you can edit it to your liking if you want, but otherwise just enter ready to run the script. And this is the package manager config file. If you don't know what any of this means, don't worry about it, but you can just do things like enable color, and what I normally do is set the number of parallel downloads to 1 for more stability, and if you didn't do it during the installation, you can include extra repositories like multilib or testing. And once you've done that, you can press Ctrl X to exit, Y to save any changes, and then enter. And then you can edit the bootloader config if you want to. So for example, the bootloader for me is Limine, so I'm going to enter 3. And apparently I entered the directory name wrong, so never mind. And it reinstalls Git just in case you downloaded the script directly from GitHub and copied it over USB or something. And now it's just installing the secondary package manager, yay, which basically lets you download a lot more programs than the basic Pacman. Then it just has to download Go. And then enter your password again, and it'll install, yay. Just press enter for all of this. And then it'll install a bunch of essential packages. And now the script is complete. So, that is Arch Linux plus the post-install script. So, Gentoo. The thing about Gentoo is it's very complicated and very slow, so I can't really accurately provide a good guide to install it. However, I did do a live stream a few months ago of me installing it myself, which you might like to follow, and there is just the Gentoo handbook on their official wiki which you can use. So yeah, sorry if you watched the video specifically for a Gentoo tutorial, but it really is just that complicated. So, this is Slackware. It basically only has one boot option. You can change the keyboard layout, language, time zone, but it doesn't really matter since we're only in the live environment, and those settings will be changed when you actually install it. So the thing about Slackware is the live environment actually has a password. It's just live, all lowercase. And the funny thing about Slackware's installer is it can create partitions, but it doesn't format them, and then complains that it doesn't format them. So, what you'll want to do is open console, and then type the command lsblk. That just lists all of the devices and partitions, and you'll probably be able to determine which device it is you want to use. So for example, I can see that the disk I want to use is NVMe 0N1, just from the arrangement and size of the partitions. So what you'll want to do is open gparted and enter the password again, live. And then you will, if there aren't partitions already there, which there are for me just from the previous installs, you'll probably want to delete any existing partitions and then create a FAT32 partition with around a gigabyte of space and an ext4 partition for the rest of it. So for example, the partitions are already the right size and file system, but I'm going to format them again just to get rid of anything that's already on there. And then apply. And then what you can do is open the install Slackware shortcut on the desktop and enter the password live. And if it detects the partitions are already there, you can hit continue to reconfigure the partitions, which as we previously discussed doesn't really work, or we could just hit skip. So then you could add swap if you set up a swap partition, set up your target partitions, and then select your ext4 partition for the root partition, and then no, do not format this partition because we've just done that. And then we can go and select install Slackware to disk, and now it has to process the modules, which takes quite a while, so just wait for it to do that. And now that it's done, you can enter the full name for your user, their logon name, which is all lowercase, no spaces, their UID number, which isn't really important, and their login shell. Then you can enter their password, and then you can enter the root password, which is normally the same, but you can make it different if you want. Then it asks if you'd like to protect the system with a basic firewall. I'm going to say yes, because why not? Well, no, apparently. And you can either install the traditional Linux loader or the EFI version, and I'd recommend doing the EFI version. Yep, install it on the ESP. Yep, install a boot menu entry. Then it asks if you'd like to configure your network, and I wouldn't right now, but you could. Then it asks which startup services you want, and it has a description right next to them. I'm going to leave it as the default, but you can see what they do and enable or disable them to fit your needs. Then you can say whether your hardware clock is set to local time or UTC. I mean, for me, that's both of them, because British, but still. And now you just have to set your time zone. And I have to go down all the way to Europe, London. My dog is barking at 2:43 AM. My mum's gonna love that. And then you can choose the text editor. It doesn't really matter, I'm just gonna go with Vim. And now you can exit and reboot the system. And you're in. That is Slackware. This is Void Linux. This is another one that beeps when you first boot it, so be ready for that. And also, there are two main versions of Void. The base version, which is a command line, and the desktop version, which uses XFCE. I am using the desktop version, but the overall setup is pretty much the same. If you want a desktop environment and you're using the base version, good luck setting it up. And there's just a bunch of different boot options, such as loading the entire thing into RAM, safe graphics, but I'm just going to go with the first one. And we are in the live environment, so what you'll want to do is open the terminal and just type void installer. However, I forgot it must be run as root, so sudo void installer. So keyboard layout. Now the cool thing about void is, if you know what it is, you could just press a letter key to go to the entries beginning with that letter. So I can just press U and go down a bit to go to the UK keyboard layout. Set up the network. Network manager is enabled but inaccessible. That doesn't matter because we're doing it from the installation media. Set the source installation. Now, if you do network and you're connected to a network, there's a chance it might not set up the desktop environment correctly, so I would just always go with local. Then you can select your mirror for the package manager, and Europe, and there isn't one for every country, so I would just go with the ones at the top since they tend to be the fastest, or just the one closest to you. And then you can set your system hostname. I'm just going to set it to void t490s. Then you can set your system locale. So for example, for me it would be ENGB. And then time zone. Select your continent, and then basically the nearest city. So for me it would be London. And then you can set the root password for the system, which is basically the admin password. Enter the login name for your user, which is all lowercase, no spaces, and the display name, which is basically the full name for it. Then enter the password, and then select what groups you want that user to be a member of. I just leave it as the default if you don't know what they are, but feel free to change them if you do. And then select the disk to install the bootloader to. Make sure you don't accidentally install it on your Ventoy drive. Then you can choose whether or not to use a graphical terminal for the bootloader. And then partition the disks. Choose the correct disk. This one. I mean, the partitions are already correct from the last one, but you would just want your partitions to look like this. So, for example, I'm going to demonstrate without actually changing it because I'm not going to write, but just new size 1G and then type EFI system, and then in the free space new, the rest of it, type Linux root x86-64, and then what you do is select write and type yes, but I've already got the partition set up, so I'm just going to quit. And then file systems, this one, vfat, which is FAT32 for EFI partitions, and then make it so that it's mounted at /boot, not /bit, I can't type, /boot/EFI, yep, and then that one, you can format it as any of these. BetterFS has slightly better performance but is a bit complicated. So ext4 is good enough for most people. ext3 and 2 are just older versions, so I don't think there's really a need to use them. F2FS is the same as what Android uses, which means your Linux partition will be readable on Windows if you're dual booting. Swap, VFAT aren't for root partitions, and XFS is just another one you can use. I'm going to go with ext4, and the mount point is just / for the root, and yes, create a new file system. Done. And then you can start the installation with the saved settings. It will tell you if any of the settings aren't correct, but do you want to continue? Yes. And now, just let it do its thing. Then you can select any services to enable. If you don't know what they do, I just leave them as the default, but if you do, feel free to change them. And then, it's been installed successfully. You can either continue messing around in the live environment, or just reboot into your installation. And that is Void Linux. And it's also the end of this video. Thanks for watching. This better be more popular than the last version because my voice hurts from all this talking. Thanks for watching. If you somehow watch the entire video, I suspect this is going to be like 3 hours. I'm going to have fun editing this. Anyway, yeah, bye.